Welcome, everyone. Howard Thurman, a civil rights icon, theologian, mystic, and educator, wrote, "Community cannot feed for long on itself. It can only flourish where always the boundaries are giving way to the coming of others from beyond them, those unknown and undiscovered brothers and sisters." The Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman believed in the power of religion and faith to bring people together, to harmonize human relationships so that Black and brown and white people could find each other, love each other, be together, and work together in ways that make us come alive. Welcome, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to the Thurman Conversations. We continue this month to explore the intersection of faith and food and how we can address food insecurity as we work towards racial justice. In our past conversations, you've heard us mention Frontline Farming, Project Protect Food Systems. And the names of our two guests this evening, they are Fatuma Ahmad and Damian Thompson. We will let them describe Frontline and Project Protect in their own words in a few minutes, but it is my honor to first welcome them to the Thurman Conversations and to introduce them. Fatuma Ahmad is co-founder and executive director and head farmer of Frontline Farming. She serves as president of Mile High Farmers and is a co-convener for Project Protect Food Systems workers. She is a lecturer and masters in the Masters of Environmental Studies program at CU Boulder. Fatuma was born in Denver and raised here and in Ethiopia. Fatuma has worked farming organic and heirloom vegetables on her own acreage as part of a land co-op, setting up farms for restaurants, and as farm manager for multi-acre community farms in Milwaukee and Denver. Before becoming a farmer, Fatuma was a political scientist who engaged in issues affecting farming communities, such as the push for genetically modified seeds across sub-Saharan Africa. She believes in resistance by the world's land caretakers for single solutions for crop productivity and seeks to work on reframing ideas of food insecurity. She currently serves as mayor-appointed member of the Sustainable Food Council on the Denver African American Commission and is a 2020 and 2021 Rocky Mountain Farmers Union Fellow. Fatuma is also the recipient of the Kathy Underhill inaugural scholarship, recognizing a community member who is changing hearts and minds in the hunger space with advocacy, policy, and community engagement through the lens of health equity. We welcome also Dr. Damian Thompson, Phd. He is co-founder of Frontline Farming and director of the Center for Food Justice and Healthy Communities, and is associate professor of anthropology in the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and Criminal Justice at Regis University. In addition to his training and teaching in anthropology, Dr. Thompson also holds a certification in permaculture design, an advanced permaculture design certification, and is a Yoga Alliance certified teacher. His interests center on the building of community food systems, small-scale urban food production, developing community and cultural practices related to food and medicine, teaching and learning in education, and permaculture as one method related to how to pursue those interests. Specifically, Damien asks how communities can utilize traditional and modern information and practices to build food systems which uplift marginalized and oppressed peoples, restore ecosystems, build biodiversity, and support cultural diversity, as well as provide individuals and families with the highest level of access to the means to support their own wealth. Damien is a mayor-appointed member of the Sustainable Food Council for the City of Denver and a lead convener in Project Protect Food Systems. Is it 8 o'clock yet? That was a lot. Our format for the conversation, as always, is that the three of us will talk for about 40 minutes. During that time, you will be muted, but you can add questions into the chat. We will gather those questions for the last 20 minutes or so and give Damien and Fatuma a chance to answer them all. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We are grateful, as always, to the Race Task Force for the Episcopal Church in Colorado for helping to create this series with us, and to St. Paul's Episcopal Church, where you can find recordings of all of our conversations. Our series is researched and produced by Michelle Auerbach. My name is Alan Cole, the white guy who is here to learn stuff, and your host for this evening. Fatuma, Damien, welcome. Glad to have you both. Can you tell us about Frontline Farming and Project Protect Food Systems?
Thanks for having us, Alan and Michelle. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Frontline Farming, and then Fatuma is going to talk about Project Protect Food Systems. So as you heard from our bios, Fatuma and I co-founded Frontline Farming together in late 2008. We are a POC, or more specifically Black-led organization. We are a farmer advocacy organization. We are a food justice organization. We are a food sovereignty organization, and we are an organization that advocates for changes in the food system, and to also open up the food system and open up opportunities for leadership and for access for women and other Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So we began Frontline Farming, just a little bit of background, after about 5 or 6 years working together on another project, developing Sister Gardens, which is our 1 acre urban farm, which I manage. And to make it short and to kind of stay within the frame or the bounds of the conversation, we had both, in various ways, been subject to racism within the context of trying to work within the food system. Sometimes it was very overt and blatant. Sometimes it was more subtle. And so after having worked together for, like I said, 5 or 6 years, we had developed the kind of relationship where we had the trust and the faith in one another to recognize that when we needed to activate and when we needed to start to create things for ourselves, we went ahead and we did that. And it was really about centering and being able to tell our own story in our own way. As Black people who are interested who are invested in agriculture and systems change, kind of on the larger food systems level. So Frontline Farming exists, in order to really advocate for a lot of those voices within the context of the food system that are not always heard or acknowledged. And Project Protect Food Systems is a great example of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Fatuma to let her speak on that.
Thanks, Damien, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here and valuing our voices this evening. So yeah, to talk a little bit about Project Protect Food Systems, we began Project Protect Food Systems workers in March, about April of this last year, and really began it as we watched the pandemic unfolding and knowing that our agricultural workers and other food systems workers would not receive any relief or funding. For myself, I come from an immigrant family and had a long path to become a farmer myself. And so have always taken that as a great privilege and really thought about the communities who actually make up our agricultural workforce. In Milwaukee, where I farmed and was part of a land cooperative, it was actually primarily for immigrants and people who had been disenfranchised from lease deals. A lot of times immigrant communities will be given deals and in handshake leases at much higher prices. And specifically, it was Hmong community in Milwaukee that were dealing with that. So this land cooperative was a project to help us sort of all have land and be able to farm with dignity and pay fair prices like other farmers. So since I've been farming, I've always been talking about how ag workers are not generally categorized within farmers in the data or surveys or censuses that you see. And when you bring it up, where I bring it up publicly a lot, it's always deferred to being an issue at a federal level in regards to immigration, or a labor issue, not so much an ag issue. And when you're with labor, it's an ag issue. And so nobody's ever really wanted to acknowledge or deal with it. A lot of times when I'm invited as a farmer to give big talks in rooms, I recognize that I knock out a lot of sort of things that they would want, being a woman, a child of immigrants, being Black and brown, having grown up out of the country as well. And I always start my talks by recognizing that the true farming people and communities are not represented in those rooms, and that we've actually created the legal structures that don't allow them to be there. So we convene Project Protect really out of this need and lack of that voice. Our brothers and sisters in immigration work are really fighting at detention centers right now, and haven't been able to necessarily be in a lot of these ag rooms in Colorado. So really a lot of activists, other scholar friends, people on the ground came together and just made this project out of their heart. We've raised almost $1 million that we were able to create a Promatura network of about 75 people across the state of Colorado. And there's a lot to say, but what I really want to impart to you all is just a little bit about the guiding principles that guide our work in Project Protect. So the first one is that, we believe that people who work on the front lines to produce our food are essential and not expendable. We've entered a time where people are classified as illegal and yet essential. We believe that there is no security without justice for people. We believe that protections of workers and environment is just good business. We believe that there should be equity in risk and opportunity taken. Calling people heroes is not sufficient for the risks that they're taking. We believe in nurturing economies of solidarity and resilience. We believe in being land-based and people-based. And lastly, we believe that our role is to elevate and amplify the essential worker voices who do this work for us every day, and give that the dignity it deserves. So that's a little bit about Project Protect.
Damien, Fatuma, thank you so much. I wanted to thank you for saying two things, particularly apart from your descriptions. One, Damien, thank you for using the word activate, and Fatuma for using the word justice. I'd love to know, since you brought those two things up, how does your work relate to your faith life and your faith journey?
I can answer this first, Damien, if you want. Okay. So I myself am a Muslim and a practicing Muslim, and grew up in the faith. And in Islam, there are 5 pillars of Islam that guide us. And if you really look at the 5 pillars, they're really about coming together in community and different ways to do that. And one of the ones that has really informed my life, there's so many aspects of spirituality and faith, but that has grounded me is the 3rd pillar of Islam, which is called sadaqah. And a lot of people will translate it to this concept of almsgiving, or compulsory giving of a certain amount of your money, or acts of charity. And really, when the word is translated, it really means purification. Certainly growing up, we did a lot of activities around food that was about, practicing this around holidays and other ways that we do continuously. And in this concept of purification that I think is so important is that it's really about achieving balance and creating new growth in your own life. It's the recognition that all things belong to God. It's the acceptance that nothing on earth is ours, but rather given to us by God. And so as I've always sought to do work, I look to do work that I find is just, that I find is dignified, and that allows me to be a part of my community, to receive and to give what I'm able to, because as difficult as my journeys have been, and the many things I've seen and witnessed in my own life, I've been blessed in so many of the opportunities that my ancestors and families have given to me. So that's a little bit. I'll pass it to Damien.
Thanks, Fatima. It's interesting. I invited my mom and sister to listen to this conversation, so they're on the call. I'm sure my mother is terrified at what I'm going to say. And I guess I'll just kind of say it to say that, I was raised and have to recognize that I was raised in a society and in a household that's like steeped in, a lot of Christian values, a lot of what people call Judeo-Christian values, and have to give respect and recognition to that. I was always a little bit of a skeptic when it came to some of the other aspects of organized religion as I experienced it in Christianity. And that kind of allowed me to start to, develop a set of spiritual ideas or a set of spiritual practices that were a little bit more rooted for me and kind of like my perceptions of the world and how, I was responding to, to the environment that was around me. And I was talking to students today or yesterday, and I was saying that, for me, one of the most underlying principles, and it actually relates very much to what Fatima was just saying, is that my role or my job as a human being is to create the conditions for life to thrive. And that includes my life, that includes the lives of other human beings, the people that I come into contact with, but also through farming, right? And through land, through that connection with the land, recognizing that we have such an amazing opportunity and responsibility as human beings to work with nature, work with our natural community and with other people to create that level of beauty that allows people to really thrive, right? And to create landscapes, to help create landscapes that really allow all of our relations, the smallest to the largest, to really thrive. And so my spiritual association with farming and with land really is about that point of contact that allows me to really create those opportunities for beauty and for expansion and for growth. So yeah.
I'd just say you guys are awesome. That was so well put. Thank you so much. Hey, Damien, tell me about growing up on a family farm in North Carolina. How has that shaped you?
So the saddest thing, the only correction, is that I didn't have the opportunity to grow up on the farm. My mother grew up on a 100-acre farm, and so I thought a lot about this. And of course, I grew up loving food because of that connection. But I think that as far as growing up that way on the hill, I have some really fond memories. It's the ideas of visiting your family and walking into the house that your great grandmother lives in, and then walking out of that house and walking 25 paces to the house where your grandmother lives, and then walking out of that house and walking another 50 paces to where your great uncle lives. And so there's a lot of association with that farm that's deeply personal in terms of family. There's a lot that's deeply personal in terms of thinking about food, right? And just the access to food that my family had, the access to the means of production, so to speak, that my family had. And one of the most impactful things that my mother said to me about growing up on the hill, on the farm, is that we were poor, but we didn't know it. And so, without having to learn it in a book or without having to be told by an authority, I was kind of indoctrinated or brought up within a space that was the type of space that allowed Black people to live with dignity in the South, in a moment in time where Black people weren't necessarily always allowed to live in dignity. I learned about, the history of Black people in the South through the history of my family coming from sharecroppers, acquiring land, raising a family, raising multiple generations of a family. So it's really difficult for me to kind of like take who I am now and separate it from those experiences. And then I'll say this, as far as food goes, just the idea that, even when we would have fish fries and in the afternoon on Sundays, and even being a little boy without the recognition always of what happened, but the food was about our ability to access it. It was about our ability to prepare it with love through cooking. And it was about our ability to share it as a family. And so I really was enveloped in a food and even going to faith and family environment that nurtured a lot of aspects of who I am that I think now today are finally able to kind of be given full voice. So could not underestimate the impact of that experience.
Man, I'm listening to you as a Southern white guy, and you put that so truthfully and so beautifully. That was really awesome. Fatima, tell me about what shaped you growing up.
That's a big question. So I was born in Denver, actually, right here in the same house that I live in now, kind of on the southwest side. And my family, immigrated here when the dictator in Ethiopia under the so-called communist regime, one of the most authoritarian dictators, had come into power. His name was Mengistu Haile Mariam. So they came here in the early 80s. And like most immigrants, actually a lot of immigrants have the idea of going back home when they come to places, whether it's for push or pull factors. And when Ethiopia, was liberated and its so-called democracy came into effect in the early 90s. My family actually went back home. So my father had never immigrated here. So I moved back to Ethiopia when I was in 3rd grade and then had to come back to Colorado again for a year because there was some war that broke out again, and moved back there for all of middle school and most of my high school life. And I think that, well, growing up in America and being from Ethiopia in the 80s, it was the constant and only view of Ethiopia, or as a lot of people see many countries in Africa, as just Africa. But particularly with Ethiopia was the famines that we were facing early in the 80s was really in popular image. So a lot of the just responses or ways that people interacted with me. I'm from Ethiopia and Yemen. Both my parents are also from both. But the ways that people responded to me being from Ethiopia was always to kind of speak about that starvation or say lots of, derogatory things about it. And I grew up just really acutely aware of this relationship of food and traveling somewhere where people could only see this idea of starvation when actually Ethiopia is one of the most topographically diverse regions on Earth, has one of the lowest points on Earth and some of the highest mountain ranges in Africa and the north of Ethiopia. So it was always a question to me of how could such a beautiful place be the face of starvation? And one thing that's important to recognize is that famines are not things that are singular events that just happen as an emergency or disaster often. As we look at my home country of Yemen right now, that's experiencing one of the most intense famines that we know of in history right now. It's a consequence of war and the US bombings there in Saudi Arabia that have been going on for so many years and that people don't recognize or really even care about, it feels like here. I used to think that when I would say the countries I was from and people in America would say like, oh my God, what is that? Or where is that? We always talk about how ignorant geographically a lot of Americans are and really limited. American exceptionalism has its own negative side effects as well. And so, in the past couple of years, when I say I'm from Yemen and people are like, where is that? It's just very unacceptable to me that we don't even know the countries and places that we're imminently bombing, and that we then reflect to people that these are places of famine and starvation. So to me, I thought I would become a political scientist, and it was about, these benevolent people getting analysis wrong. And I had to learn that actually, the world is shrouded in white supremacy, and there's logical thoughts around how people perceive themselves being privileged and other people or nation states not, when we look at colonialism and what's happened with food and what's been done in making so many of these colonized countries now producers of luxury crops for other countries. So that's a lot of different places I went, but a lot of those things inform me in sort of how I approach it and why I wanted to become a farmer myself.
Thank you both for telling us a little bit about that. I want to ask you about, you made the connection to white supremacy, and I want you to tell us how that shows up in our food system. And as we go through, please take opportunities to tell us how farming is a liberation movement. But talk to us about the white supremacy in our food system.
So I was thinking about this, and it's probably because I was thinking about the past so much, and about my upbringing, that I was reminded of a story that to me is kind of really emblematic of white supremacy, even though I experienced it as a child. And so I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina in the 80s, and my mom will remember this story. And one of the local food chains, Food Lion, there was a huge expose on the news. I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And so the scandal was that at grocery stores in the Black neighborhoods on the Black side of town, they would take old meat and they would wrap it in fresh, like, ground beef. So you'd have ground beef that was 5 days old, and they just take fresh ground beef and they'd wrap it over the old ground beef, and then they would package it and then they would sell it. And obviously it was making people sick. And, for some reason today, that really just hit me, is like, that might have been the first time that I ever really understood and recognized like racism and white supremacy in the food system. I think my mom even had to explain to me how it was possible that people could be forced to eat meat that was bad in one grocery store, right? Black people, where other people were not. And I even wrote it down, just kind of trying to think about it. The thing about it that's about white supremacy being sold products that will make you sick, and having that be done intentionally, that's white supremacy. And it's white supremacy in the food system, and it was an intentional practice, right? So we talk about practices, policies, and procedures by the store. And so it was systemic. And the intentional harm, I think, is where you find white supremacy in the food system. But the thing that I think makes white supremacy in the food system really abhorrent is the plausible deniability that a lot of white people have, because they don't understand how the food system works, and they don't understand those practices, right? So if you live in a neighborhood where you get the good meat, right, you have no idea about the reality of people intentionally being made sick and being discriminated against by being sold bad meat, right? And maybe even being charged more for that bad meat. So to me, it's a really tangible and very small example of what white supremacy looks like in the food system, and how it impacts us, like, on that really fundamental level. So there are all of these other levels, of course, but that was the idea that really, or the story that really jumped into my mind. So I'll let Fatuma give some more context.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, so I think, and particularly at Frontline Farming, we think about this a lot in terms of systems thinking. And some of my students are even here tonight, so shout out to them. And, a lot of times when we're talking about these issues, we see them as individualized issues that's embodied in a person's body themselves. And we see that with food so often. We also see it in ways that it's done to communities, calling them food deserts, when actually it's a system of food apartheid, and we see these things repeated. We're thinking about it a lot in terms of the metrics, or even in the approaches of analysis that we often see in food systems work, agricultural economy work. And it's this, when you're taking it as this individual analysis, you're really removing this whole context from it. And that, people are always like, well, how are you gonna, just beat white supremacy in the food system? Well, we need to kind of think about and look at all of these different points within the system that are creating this. So really trying to analyze what the institutions are, what the different actors, where power is held there. What we often see in these types of metrics is they just go on to traumatize and re-victimize us, and are as ancient as, so many of the other practices within slavery of reading our bodies. It always becomes metrics about obesity of Black women, what are eating habits of Latinx children, when we should really be asking bigger questions about the system that facilitates these repeated things, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And it's not only about food, but if we think about the citing of waste, where 3 out of 4 of our waste zones are in Black communities, and if we think of the fact that our communities are never leaving and moving into toxic zones, but that these are always cited on our bodies in those ways. So we see it a lot, and just this, it's a lot easier for people not to have the urgency and to be able to make it this far out bigger problem, as if we as humans are not creating these systems and power and part of these institutions, and as if they can't do things about it because it's other powers above them, but really they're in that system. We see it a lot in our work right now, where people will always put our subjectivity on us when we arrive in a room. They always identify themselves as objective and researchers, but ourselves as community or the people who are impacted. And so we see a lot of problems around the paradigm that people try to put on us of this positivist thinking of what can be known and the knower, and this idea of science like it was developed in this objective space, when we actually think about the history of science itself and who were considered, factually right in times. So I think we, fight a lot in rooms about that, to even allow different forms of knowledge to be acknowledged and dignified. And I think the important thing is that within that white supremacist view, it does a disservice to all our communities, because that type of analysis doesn't really capture reality accurately. And in our work, we're trying to capture reality to a certain degree so we can make predictions and do better for all of us in our communities. So sometimes even just the refusal to engage in analysis that actually includes the very people we're talking about perpetuates that. And we see that all the time. It's just a constant fight for us.
Guys, thank you so much. I want to bring it to Colorado. To tell us about the food system here. Who are the workers? I know we have a large immigrant population here. Pull that in for us. Connect white supremacy to our own state and how policy perpetuates it. We'd love to hear about where we live.
There's a lot of questions there. I would start by saying that you have about 65 or so percent of people in the Colorado food system working in the food system are BIPOC people, and then roughly 80% or so of those folks identify as Latinx. I know that Fatuma has some things that she wants to kind of talk about. I think that for me, what stuck out with this question in terms of thinking about especially what it means to immigrate and to come to Colorado, and for some reason I was really just kind of struck and wanted to think about or speak about the racialization process that happens in the midst of the immigration. And we just had a roundtable with some senators, and we had some of our Project Protect promotores and other folks who were there to speak about the conditions of agricultural workers. And the thing that really struck me was, by and large, these folks had been agriculture workers for 10, 12, 15, 25 years, and you really think about what compels someone to work in an occupation that doesn't have a future, doesn't have the opportunity for advancement, doesn't have the opportunity maybe even for land ownership. You work 25 years and maybe you don't even have the opportunity for a green card or for a permanent resident status or for citizenship. And so really, helping people to understand that the agricultural workers who are here in Colorado, and so many of them are really dedicated to the land, and they're really dedicated to the work, and they're really dedicated to their communities. And I think that as we talk about liberation and what that looks like in the future, you know, the people who are driving rural agricultural economies should be the people who own those economies and who run those economies. So I think that that's kind of one piece of it. But just recognizing that even though these folks have migrated here, have gone through this process of racialization, have been shoehorned into a binary white, black, American racialized system, that, you know, they are doctors, they are engineers, they are, you know, they are farmers, expert agriculturalists, and to really recognize that it's the process of making Latinx a race, right? Making Spanish more than a marker of language and culture, that we are, what am I trying to say? We are invisibilizing, we are marginalizing, and we are creating danger, you know, for people just in trying to work and trying to live and trying to, you know, difficulty in trying to make sure that their kids are educated, warm, or have safe places to sleep. And so, you know, the agriculture workers are us. They're from all over. They're from around the world, you know, just Mexico, also places in Eastern Africa, also places throughout Latin America, Central America. So it's just, you know, understanding that through the process of participating in the food system, the process of actually engaging in work that some of them can be life-sustaining for themselves on a spiritual level, they're completely marginalized. And so we can talk more about liberation and what that looks like, but I just wanted to say those few words, but especially about that racialization process in immigration.
Fatuma.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, that was, we always say, like, you know, when we even talk about people stolen from Africa, these were engineers that were brought here. And, you know, the people who labor in the fields have, you know, years, ancestors, histories of experience doing this work, that we're so blessed to be able to have them because of other push factors, because of the United States and other countries as well, that force people to leave their homes. And that stands out in a lot of our conversations with ag workers. It's not that people came here and they were just trying to find work and just immigrated and defaulted to farming, you know? It's like, no, they're really skilled people that you can't even replace them when you try, you know? So just wanna honor that. I think that, you know, when we talk about farming, a lot of people, when they talk about, does racism still exist in America? And when we look at straight statistics about the fact that, you know, in the 1920s, over 14% of farmers were Black, whereas right now we have less than 1% that are Black, even in Colorado, and that, you know, the same systems that were supposed to be supporting farmers, like the USDA and other programs, actually worked against them in legal structures to separate them from that land. And we see these things perpetuated onto today. And a lot of people like to think about it in terms of that history as if it's done. And it's like, no, let's talk about the economic value of that land that it's still generating, that we can talk about for people and how that's an ongoing thing. So when I think about agricultural production, it's about that liberation. It's about us being able to claim land back. It's about us touching into our own stories and ancestors who also farmed for so long, and in many cases upheld this country farming itself. So I think it's always sad when we are trying to figure out what those percentages are, and at least us at Frontline have been working a lot to track that information and create programs that can advocate and generate new farmers of color, particularly because the models that allow people to become farmers are not very inclusive, or really a way you want to do it. Being an apprentice for someone for almost free, breaking your back out in the middle of nowhere is not accessible. And I think that the other point that I'd like to make is that, you know, It's been really painful with the pandemic because certainly, it's obvious, it's so evident what that structural racism looks like when we look at the people who died at the JBS plant in Greeley and the billboard they put up, and they all look like people like me, and it's very evident, although the hard thing, and that I really want to bring to light to everyone, a lot of people don't recognize in this food movement work, is that we don't even have data and metrics on food systems workers, right? It's not even this general focus in people that are doing this work. It's more about urban farms and different things, but it's like it's maybe overwhelming in certain ways, but it's really important for us to be doing some of that work, which we have really taken on for our ag workers in Colorado and been tracking that in data. So it's like, what does that look like? What are numbers? We can tell you specifically for what H-2A temporary and migrant workers are in Colorado, which is about 6,800, although it was super underestimated, but through specific tracking with our data activist, Casey Neese, who I also see on here tonight, we were able to start painting that picture so people couldn't make it this big nebulous problem again of like, oh, well, how are we gonna help those people? It is a problem, but this exploitation, it's just like so overwhelming. And it's like, well, let's start out with like getting some solid information on who they are so that we can say we're not California, we're not Florida, and Colorado can do better by these people. So there's a lot in that and how we strive to paint those pictures as well. So thanks for that question.
Okay, what I want to know, what we all want to know is, tell us how to dismantle all this. Tell us how your work is dismantling all this so that we can see a lens into something better,
I'll go and say a few words on this one first. The thing that I think has been most shocking to me as we've moved into, more policy work with COVID pandemic, and we moved into different spaces and different levels of conversation, and really being able to sit in rooms where you understand by what's happening that those are the spaces in which inequality, white supremacy, and racism are perpetuated. And so, Fatuma spoke about like fighting in different rooms. And I think that right now, for us and the work that we've had to do, it's been about confronting that inequity in the rooms where it's being created and replicated. And I think that there are many different fronts of this battle. Some are with the land, some are, in protest movements of various, degrees and type, but it is necessary for people with the backgrounds of Fatuma and myself and others who are immigrant, who have been othered and who have been oppressed historically, to be in those rooms and to articulate a completely different vision of what's possible for the food system, because we've experienced it through our culture and through our traditions. And, there's just so much else to say, but I think that right now that's a really important place for the fight to happen. And if we're not in those rooms, I fear a lot of the work that is being done on the ground is just being Fatuma, one of Fatuma's here, instrumentalized. Thank you. And then also, just being really instrumentalized.
I don't have a lot to add to that. Would just say on that personal human level for people listening, like, it's about how we say that justice is appealing to the system that already exists and has played a big role in our oppression. So we don't believe in just stopping there. We think of sovereignty and liberation as different, and it's us even allowing ourselves the ability to future cast, to imagine and create new spaces that feel more authentic to who we are as humans. And as Ramon Parrish had taught me once, that all things can't be great on the inside while things are bad on the outside, and things can't be all bad on the inside while things are all great on the outside. And so how we connect with the world around us matters. And it really matters, when we do our equity trainings, one of the pillars that we have is relationships, how we treat each other, how we cultivate that love and trust with each other, how we allow each other to show up as full humans and acknowledge that people are coming in with differences and so many other things in their own life. So many people as Black and brown people want to put us in the same group, even with Latinx people. It's like, are you kidding? Like, that is histories and worlds and so many things, you know, that has its own complexity. So just trying to honor that diversity within each of us, which isn't about identity politics, but really about survival and the cultivation of new ideas and ways of being, even if people say that we're marginalized and put on the outer edges. The outer edges are the spaces of growth and imagination and resilience as well. So I think about it in those ways.
So tell us about the work at Project Protect, why it works so well, and also give us some information about your coalition building.
I'll start out and just say a little bit about Project Protect. You know, Fatuma shared with everyone the guiding principles of Project Protect food systems. And in order to kind of follow up on that last question, it has been really important and really impactful for all of us to identify the values that were going to lead how we were going to work together. And so when we talk about the way that the coalition's been built, when you think about, you know, Fatuma brought up the relationships, you know, and really working together in ways that are respectful, not only of individuals, but also of our relationships, you know, and really taking time to cultivate those relationships. And that's been a part of the larger coalition building as well. And to a certain extent, developing that trust, but then also developing spaces where people can feel authentically seen and heard as they come to the table. And with the intention that we're all going to be working towards the same goals in the same ways, because we've already articulated it together. So there's a lot there about relationship building in our coalition, but I'll stop there.
Fatuma, can you say something about the Promotora Network?
Sure. So the Promotora Network, you know, we have 4 different groups within Project Protect. Really, like Damien said, you know, we believe in building culture before trying to create institutions. And even during the pandemic, we found that that is such a resilient way of being, because it allows us to pivot together to respond to different things. But we all know that we have this shared culture and understanding of what we're trying to do. So the Promotora Network came out of the social movements group. And, you know, before, right when we started, we had recognized we needed to have a social movements group, not only to think about how we're informed in the work we do, but also how we go back with resources to communities that we'll work with. It was really clear right off that the communities that we are trying to reach have been invisibilized, have been treated in ways that are so threatened, and that they're super vulnerable, and that they don't trust anybody, and that the ways that these communities, even though they're invisibilized to these systems that don't provide anything for them while they work so hard in labor for us, is that they survive through resilience of their own communities, through mothers who, you know, take food for the workers, through the children who will translate, through the aunts who take people to hospitals. So we recognize right off, to do any of this work, that we need to access those people. And the Promotora, you know, model is something that's existed for a long time, has been implemented by the CDC before as well. And it's really this concept of navigators. I just think of it as like this kind of academic or conceptual way of just really thinking about the people who are doing that work every day. And what's important about it is that you're actually compensating them to do that work, and that you're actually providing them with the resources and connections to support the communities that they seek to support. And I think that what's beautiful about it is that it's another way to counter white supremacy and the nonprofit industrial complex. For us, we knew that any money we were going to raise, we weren't trying to just put it into some other nonprofit and to see administrative fees go out when most of us are volunteering to do this work and do it out of our heart. And so I think that that in itself is a way of being, revolting against the system, is trying to think of how we economically empower people as well with the assets we have, and that we actually compensate them for their knowledge. A lot of times, and even with the vaccines right now, we see all this contracting going out and all this money being spent, where those same people are trying to come to us as community organizers to help them contact our communities and people. And it's like, just honor the people that do this work, stop sending them to the wrong places already, and infuse these small organizations who are boots on the ground with the money, which also has been a thing that, out of COVID we've seen, is just that grants can move really quickly, that this whole industry of grant writing and the revolving door of the same people it perpetuates in these rooms doesn't actually have any absolute reason to be that way, than people just perpetuating that belief in it. And the fact that it elevates and sustains a lot of people's jobs in that way, but it doesn't serve our communities. So yeah, that's a little bit about the network. There's about 75 people throughout Colorado. We cover all of Colorado. We've split it up into 4 regions, really looking primarily all the areas where our ag workers are concentrated, and really trying to serve the migrant, H2A, and temporary workers who can often be the least counted and just not provided for within our communities.
So we've got about 10 or 12 minutes left, and I don't want to let you guys go without you each telling us what your vision of a just food system is. What do you see? Help us see that picture. Give us some of your soul in that.
I'll go first, Damien. I think for me, that vision, and really Damien did a lot of work on it, is something like the guiding principles that I started off this evening with. I think that's a very succinct way to put it, and to recognize that a just food system is not an endpoint, that it is a constant space that we need to all be kind of reckoning with, and also to recognize that we all have our roles. Everybody has roles, and supporting people that do that food work and acknowledging it is a role we can play, even if we're not necessarily farming or growing food in that way.
I think that Fatuma was spot on when mentioning those guiding principles. And for me, it really comes down to, again, whether or not you choose to make your life as a farmer or as a producer on some level, that people have access, that people have access to land, people have access to spaces where they can really come into contact and commune and understand the beauty and the power of nature. I think we need spaces, and I think the food system can facilitate this, that really are about creating and cultivating beauty, and allowing people to be in beautiful spaces, especially children. So there's a lot of things that I can envision, but I always, for some reason, think about very happy children in a just food system.
I did. We've got some questions, but I didn't want to have to stop without hearing you two say that part. So we had a question about co-ops. A comment from one of our listeners. We see a consolidation of the retailers in the food system. What can you guys say about community food co-ops?
I think that cooperatives and cooperative engagement, especially around food, can be a really powerful tool, both in community and then also economically. I think that there are many opportunities. I think that there are opportunities for producer co-ops, but then there are also opportunities for people who are consumers of food, people who want to support farmers, to create co-ops. and then maybe even to start to think about what it means to work cooperatively with their farmers. COVID has obviously shown the weak aspects of our food chain when you think about it on that level. And so to shorten that food chain, people talk about shortening the number of miles that food travels, but really recognizing, even in a place like Denver, where I think we went from pre-pandemic right around 18% food insecurity, and then within a matter of 2 or 3 months, it was at 25%, and then I think now it's around 30%, and really understanding how can people in cities like Denver work cooperatively and develop those types of cooperative mechanisms to not only support farmers, but then have that support of the farmers then come back to them in the form of food that can be affordable and accessible. So there are just so many opportunities to work collectively, I think, kind of across the spectrum.
I just want to add something to that, at Frontline Farming, we can't, it's technically to be a cooperative as a nonprofit is not something technically in Colorado we can do, but we do operate as a cooperative ourselves and have some cool bylaws. And what that means is that our full-time employees become a founding member if they're not already. And what that means for us is that they're a part of voting on our board. So while Dr. Thompson, Damien, and I won't vote, everyone else will. It helps so that we don't create these types of spaces where it's like, oh, we have this idea as farmers, but the board won't really like that. Let's see if we can talk to them and get them to do that. So really changing that power structure, being transparent about our budgets with those who we work with, and trying to do collective decision making. So a lot of different ways to think about cooperatives. And just to kind of directly answer your question, I would also say that yes, it's important in order to leverage power. Small farmers don't have the capacity to meet these large demands to make it into markets, especially, you're not producing that much to be able to make it into these King Supers or whatever. And so cooperatives in that way amongst farmers has been proving to be really successful and good way to leverage power in the food system and get yourself in those markets. And what I also know is that it deals with the same issues that you can have as humans. I like to think that threes are good partnerships, whereas twos can be rough, but you can run into those human issues as well within negotiating that. A good example here that I think of is Roberto Meza of East Growers Food Hub, and what they're trying to do around kind of building a food hub and creating a cooperative form. And it's awesome for us, if I have some bumper crop of something, he can help me, amalgamate that with some other farmer stuff and get it sold. And so, or if I get a big order from a restaurant, I can always go to Roberto, and I feel so awesome because I'm hooking up our farmers as well, and he can do that order that I never would have been able to.
So I had a question from one of our viewers about your thoughts on the role of white supremacy in the dominance of land ownership in this country. And they mentioned specifically the Justice for Black Farmers Act.
There were a lot of things that flashed for me. Being from North Carolina, and Fatuma already spoke about the loss of agricultural land, of Black farmers, and even my own family's farm no longer being in our possession because of eminent domain and taxes and so many other things that can kind of wear away at family-owned land. But even understanding, kind of historically, that in order for my great grandfather to purchase the land, a white man had to go and vouch for him, right? And so you really start to think about all of these different ways, whether it be in economics and access to loans, right? Access to the opportunity to buy the land itself, the types of taxes and the types of legal mechanisms that have been utilized to dispossess Black people of land, right? Those, to me, it's like this really, really deeply historical thing. So when we look around and we see Black folks living, you know, a lot in urban areas, even though you're starting to see us move back to the South and to places like that, you know, as Fatuma indicated with immigration, like Black folks didn't leave the land because we didn't like it. We didn't leave the land because we didn't enjoy it. You know, like we've been farming for generations, even going back to the continent of Africa. That was why we were stolen in the first place, right? So to really to recognize that that white supremacy is the reason why so many people, whether they be migrated here or have been descended of enslaved Africans, why we don't have land, right? Why we don't have access, why people now think that they can project their beliefs about Black women onto us vis-a-vis metrics, right? Those are, I mean, it's like, it's not just one place in the food system that white supremacy manifests. It manifests in every single place, and on big levels, and then also small levels as well. So, yeah.
So, guys, how can we support you?
Hey, I want to answer that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
And say, I think we all recognize these issues. People are saying, you know, that bill, it's made it, and like they don't believe it's going to make it very far. But I want to say, like, what's up with reparations? And that these are actually tangible and real conversations. It always becomes this absurd thing when it's brought up in regards to Indigenous and Black communities, and to pause and recognize the lands that we're on of the Arapaho, the Ute, the Cheyenne, the Denai, and the many other tribes of Colorado that have been here before us. And when we think about, you know, reparations, like, you know, the fact that we, you know, the US itself was a big proponent of the Luxembourg Agreement and the recognition that reparations should happen after the Holocaust for Jewish people that suffered at that time. And also when we think about Japanese internment here, although it took a long time for even that to happen, that we acknowledged and gave reparations there. You know, when we look at the history based on labor stolen from Black people from 1619 to 1865, that's 250 years of slavery, 60% of US history. If we count just the 100 years of Jim Crow segregation in there, that's another 80% of our history. So a lot of times people will say like things like, you know, well, my ancestors, you know, weren't slaveholders. And it's like, yes, but your ancestor was maybe a baker or a policeman or whatever they were that upheld this whole system that did this to specific communities of Black, Indigenous people, people of color across the history of this land that is so brutal that we really feel today as we see what's happening with COVID and just the realities of how this is playing out, that this is just a different iteration of the same kind of brutality. When we look at our prisons as well, that we house 25% of the world's prison population, that oftentimes these are cited in Superfund places, that the prisoners themselves are punished through food, that food is the biggest exchange system within prisons. There's so much in that. And I just think that, you know, this idea of reparations and grounding it is really important for people. We recently had a speaker that Damien, as with Renee Marco of Dahlia Campus Farms, they chair equity committee for Mile High Farmers, and they brought this awesome speaker. I don't remember her full name, Damien, but she gave a really great presentation on reparations and a really great metaphor that I want to leave people here with tonight, which is like, rather than taking it always to this defense and to this bigger concept, if we can just focus on what this idea of reparations mean. If we take an example of you borrowing a car from your friend and perhaps getting in some accident and then bringing the car back to your friend, and at that point just being like, oh man, I crashed your car, here's your car, you know, here it is. That wouldn't feel good for you either, right? Well, maybe the next step is you might be like, well, here's your car. I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry this happened with your car. Well, that doesn't probably feel very mutually fulfilling either. But that reflection of saying like, how do I remedy this harm that I know that exists and has happened and is perpetual and now has limited your ability to do so many things and privileges me in so many ways? How do I try to amend these harms and to think about how we can do that, not only with land reparations, but ourselves within so many of the different positions we occupy, to try to create these ecosystems that flourish, that create growth and equalness amongst us all. And we recognize that for ourselves, you know, even at Frontline, is like, we don't want to be a bigger tree than anybody out there in the woods. We want to grow with all our partners and all the people that we do this work with. And even when it's hard sometimes and it feels like people are white supremacists in rooms, we got to bring them along with us to create that ecosystem that we need.
Man, I really appreciate you both saying that. We need to make people whole, right? And when you guys were talking, I thought of something. I'll interject real quickly. There's this artist, this rap artist named Lecrae, and he has a song called "Facts," which is a brilliant tune. But at the beginning of that song, it's a quote from the Reverend Dr. William Barber, a North Carolina boy from Goldsboro, talking about reparations and not just saying I'm sorry, but but making people whole afterwards. So you guys put that so well. Man, you guys got to come back, because we're out of time and y'all didn't even get started good. It doesn't, I think you could talk all night. And I just want to say thank you for being here. You guys are beautiful people and doing awesome work. And when all this COVID stuff is done, man, we got to have you over around a big old table of food and just feed a bunch of people. So thank you so much. I want to thank everybody, all of you, for being a part of our conversation tonight here on the Thurman Conversations. We've been hearing about you two for the last couple of months. So thank you two for being here. Again, can you tell us how to find you?
I'll go with Frontline Farming. I know that Michelle put the link to Frontline Farming in the chat. It's www.frontlinefarming.org. So that's Frontline Farming, and I'll let Fatuma speak to Project Protect.
Same, projectprotectfoodsystems.org. If you are a grower or interested in that, check us out at Mile High Farmers as well. We serve the Front Range, and we also have the Black and Brown Growers Cooperative with a summit coming up here soon, I believe on the 20th of March. So if you're a Black and Brown grower out there in Colorado, reach out to us at Frontline. We would love to connect, and not only growers, but those who support growers. So that's all as humans. So reach out, and we'd love to connect there as well. And thanks so much for having us tonight and honoring our voices. It was a pleasure to be here. And we know Michelle's behind the scenes here as well. So thanks, Michelle, for always uplifting us as well.
Yep. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. The Thurman Conversations series is sponsored by the Race Task Force of the Episcopal Church in Colorado and St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Lakewood. And our series is researched and produced by Michelle Auerbach. As always, if you like what you are hearing here, don't tell us, tell your friends. Stay safe, love your neighbor, and wear a mask. In fact, wear 2 masks. Good night, everybody.